I can't wear my shirt tonight.
Oh, we'll have to wait till next Shabbos.
It's in the wash.
Mustn't wash.
If I'd have known, I'd have sent my laundry over.
Sorry, I can't wear my shirt.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our second question and answer session for the community. It's going to be a question session, not necessarily an answer session. Thanks, Shoshana. I'm joined by the better part of our rabbinic team, which my lovely wife Shoshana, and as with last time, no questions are off the cards.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hello, nice to see you.
First time today?
I know, ridiculous. So no questions off the cards. We want to hear your questions about all and sundry. It doesn't necessarily have to do with COVID or anything COVID related. Maybe people are a little bit tired of that. It could be anything, and a little bit sort of like the Yom Kippur sessions that we are so popular in the shul. If you want to make your question anonymous, you can do it privately in the chat to us, and we will keep your anonymity. Or if you're happy to unmute yourself, you can unmute yourself in two ways. Either press unmute or shortcut, press the space bar and hold it down like a walkie-talkie whilst you talk, and then let go and it remutes yourself back again. Just so you know, we're live on YouTube, and we're looking forward to a wonderful evening together with you. And whilst we're here, just a big shout out to everyone that's making everything that's happening in the shul at the moment so successful. We're open again. We are planning ahead, and the community, I think, is continuing to support each other in a beautiful way and go from strength to strength. So let's hear from you. Who would like to ask the first question? Don't all jump at once.
Sasson.
Sasson, unmute yourself. Or I'm going to unmute you. Michael.
In these unprecedented times, when someone is bereaved, you would it's a comfort to say Kaddish, and surely there could have been some sort of special announcement from the chief rabbi for people to say Kaddish at a Zoom shiva, where you know that there are other people, or you know that people are watching or listening. It's a comfort for people to say Kaddish. So I just wonder why there couldn't have been a special thing for this particular time, basically.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really thoughtful one as well. We talked about this a bit on Shabbat in shul between Mincha and Mariv, and I'll share with you some of the things that we shared then. First of all, as I said, this is I think one of the greatest pains of COVID is not just the passing of our loved ones, but also the difficulty in mourning in a normal way for the people that have passed. And to go to a shiva, or to go to a levaya, for example, with just 3 people there. I've had colleagues who've had no one there. It's just them and the person who's passed away, and a smartphone with Zoom tuned in, and that feels like mourning has been stolen away from people to have all sorts of conditions. And similarly, shiva is a time when families and friends come together and celebrate and remember the life of the person that has passed, and to not have that flow of people coming through the house. I mean, people who've experienced shiva have a whole range of different experience of it. Some people find it overwhelming, some people find it very nourishing, most people find it very tiring, but nevertheless it is a time of sort of intense social interaction and sharing, and that's not been present. Even with a Zoom shiva, there's only so much that one can can do. So it does feel like mourning has been, we're mourning for mourning.
It's been like it's been put on put on lockdown, basically.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
normally when someone passes away, we are just enveloped by a rabbi, by the community, by our friends and family, and it just must be. I can't understand. I can't appreciate what it must be like for people.
Yeah. And then to top it off, Michael, your question, which is that the way that Jews punctuate their experiences of mourning, the way that Jews kind of process mourning is through almost a leitmotif, like one of Wagner's leitmotifs, that we have this repeated prayer throughout from the time the person's buried, through Shiva, through the year, through the Shloshim, if there's a year, through the year, every Yortzeit there's a Kaddish. And without a minyan of people gathered together in one location, so there's no Kaddish. And just to explain why there is no Kaddish, is that Kaddish is known in halacha as a davar shebikdusha, something of sanctity. And our sages learn from a tradition from Sinai how to understand the way that we manifest this thing of sanctity. Why is it a thing, a time of sanctity, a davar shebikdusha, a moment of sanctity, a place of sanctity? Why is that special? Because we understand that the divine presence rests upon that place at that time. So when the entire community, or when a minyan is gathered together and they're saying Kedusha, they're saying the sanctification of God's name, or they're saying Kaddish, so then because there's these 10 people gathered together, then the divine presence, the Shekhinah, rests upon that place. The verse says, V'nikdashti, I shall be sanctified b'toich, amongst B'nai Yisrael, the people of Israel. So amongst, I shall be sanctified, my presence shall come down amongst the people of Israel. And we learn that there's a word there, toch, amongst, which is connected to a different time that the word toch appears, amongst, in the Torah. And that's when it says toch ha'edar, amongst this community or this congregation. And then we learn, what does congregation mean? So the way that the spies give their report about the land of Israel, there are 12 spies and a congregation of them. How many? How many does that congregation give? All give the same report. How many of the 12 spies all give the same report?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's not to put you on the test. There were 12 spies, but 2 of them gave a positive report.
10.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, sorry.
That's right, Michael. It's very annoying when you're discussing things with the rabbi. He's always pushing you with questions.
Always one step ahead as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, you were, weren't you? Yeah, sorry. I had to think about that.
Yeah, you have to put me to shame. You have to put me to shame with your beautiful outfit next Shabbat. So,
actually, yeah.
So we've got these 10 people who all give the same report about the land of Israel. It's a negative report, but they're described nevertheless as an Adar, as a community. It's interesting, a community can be gathered together for positive reasons, and it can be gathered together for not positive reasons. That doesn't stop them being a community. It's just that they're still bound together by common purpose. So they're called an Adar. That's 10 men who were described as an Adar, a community. Right. God says, I am going to be sanctified. I'm going to rest my divine presence amongst you. What is it? What's amongst a community of 10 men. So that's the source that the Gemara brings down for a minyan, and for a minyan being required for any time that we want the divine presence to rest upon this moment, on this place. Because it's the divine presence resting upon this place, so it has to have somewhere to go. It's not sort of like in cyberspace. It's a place that has brought together these 10 people. And that's why Zoom doesn't feel like it doesn't have the right setup to bind people together in space. It can bind people together in time, but it can't bind people together in space. And because we need a space for the divine presence to be, so then that's why there's a restriction. So that's why we're not saying Kaddish over Zoom. The question then is, though, Michael, is, well, why not say it anyway? It's true that we won't be having a minyan, and it's true that we won't be pulling the divine presence down at this moment in time into this place, because we're not all bound in one place. But maybe we should say it anyway because it's a comfort. And so that, I think that kind of gets into a really sort of interesting situation, or really interesting question about religion in general, which is, are we doing things that are that are simply for the, as Shoshana said, for the feel good factor? Are we doing things because they make us feel good, or are we doing things because they're real? So are we doing religious ceremonies, or are we connecting to God in some way? And that feels quite an uncomfortable way of talking, maybe on some level. But I suppose what we're trying to say is that Judaism is not the opiate of the masses. Judaism is not simply about getting what I need, my spiritual fix. That is a wonderful outcome of living a Jewish life, and it's the best life. It feels the best. It is the greatest life. It's the most fulfilled life. It's the happiest life. It's the most redeemed life, for sure. But that's not why we do it. We don't do it because it gives us that crutch that we need, that opiate. We do it because it's true and because it's real. Because there's something called Torah, there's something called truth, there's something called right, there's something called wrong, and ultimately there's a being called God, the being, existence, infinity. And so when we come to things like this, do we create our own ceremonies, or do we say, right now that is not available, and that's very painful, but I can't replace it at the moment. I know there's a hole, I know there's a loss, I can't really fill that up. I can't fill that up with words that don't have the status that they once would normally have. And so I think there's a choice there how we relate to religion, and it's quite an interesting one, and kind of cuts to the heart of the function that religion serves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In this day and age of computers and internet, and here we are, there are 23 of us, all, well, no, probably a bit more than that because a few doubles here. We are still all together. So by that same token, we are in the same place, okay, somewhere in the ether, but we are all together. So why shouldn't, I still don't get why that doesn't mean that if we are not, as we are all together, why we can't say Kaddish? Because I mean, okay, we lost a very dear friend yesterday, and he was an absolute angel. And his sons can't say Kaddish because of social distancing. But if everybody's all gathered together, and for all intents and purposes, we are together. We are a minion. Okay, us women don't count, but the men, there are 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm counting you, 5.
I think you're doing all right for a minute.
You know, we've got a minion here. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we have a minion. So, and we are all together in the same place, albeit somewhere in the ether, but we are all in the same place. We are all together. We all have a single purpose in mind, a single thought, a single voice for davening, for prayer, for whether it's for Refuah Shlema, whether it's for Kaddish. I just don't get why Kaddish can't be said, a minion can't be counted if everyone is in this kind of situation.
I think that's a really tough one, Susie. I think it's a good question, because on the one hand, you're right that there's this feeling of togetherness, but at the same time, on the flip side, how many occasions have we heard people who say, well, Zoom is all very well and good, but you know, it's just not the real thing. It's not like being together, really. How many grandparents have said that to their grandchildren, and grandchildren aching after their grandparents, or parents or siblings or whatever it is. So I think there's a bit of a tension there. But back to the original question, Michael's first question, I think it's a very hard situation to be in, particularly during bereavement, during grieving. What I think there could have been is a little bit more direction of how to go about having Kaddish said, even if an individual can't say it themselves. And just by way of example, many people here know, I'm sure, that my grandmother passed away during lockdown in Israel. And my mother was obviously very distressed to her mother, who lived with her for many, many years in the same house, and was very distressed about the fact that who was going to say Kaddish, because her two brothers were in a very strict lockdown in Israel, which everybody knows was draconian, and rightly so. What they did do is, my nephew is in yeshiva currently in Israel, and he didn't make it out of Israel before lockdown. So he was locked up in his yeshiva dormitory with about 12 other boys for the duration of lockdown. And my mother's grandson, so my grandmother's great-grandson, ended up asking permission of his father to say Kaddish for his great-grandmother. And his father obviously gave him permission to do that. And that was a way for somebody at least to have said Kaddish, because he was living with 12 other boys. What could have happened is that direction could have been given, how to have Kaddish said for a deceased. And even if an individual isn't saying it themselves, that could have provided at least some kind of a comfort. So were there, some kind of directive, I think that might have been helpful for some people. I don't know if that's the case. Obviously, I didn't go through it personally, but perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Barry, or first Barry, and then we'll come to
Suzanne.
Susan.
I don't really want to extend this particular conversation, but I was just curious to know what one place means. Is there a limit to how far apart people can be? Can you say Kaddish, say at Earl's Court? Can you say Kaddish in Clapham Common? What is the limit to actual space? I mean, already we're 2 meters apart before we even turn around.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we've been discussing this recently because in Israel they were having mirpeset minyanim. They were having prayer services on their balcony, and balconies were in vision of each other, but they were not the same kind of location because they were separated by walls. So does that count? It's actually a debate in halacha whether if you're separated by a wall.
What's not a debate in halacha?
Well, it's not a debate in halacha. That's right. So Shoshana said to me, she said,
Right. There's one view is that it's within view. If you're within sight line of somebody else, direct, not on Zoom, within actual sight line of someone else.
Then that's sufficient. Yeah. And there was a great synagogue, a huge synagogue in Alexandria, which was so big that the people in the gods, so to speak, in far back at the back, they couldn't hear what the chazan was saying. And so what they used to do is they would have a flag to wave when to say amen, and another flag to wave for other responses. Okay.
Applause.
So yeah, absolutely. So they were all together in the same location, but they weren't able to hear, and nevertheless they could still respond. So that also gives us some sort of indication of what it means. You're in one place either because it's surrounded by walls or because you're within sight of each other. That's one place. Here we're in virtual sight of each other. It's a virtual moment. It's a moment where we're connected in time, but not necessarily connected in space. So that's the tricky part. Suzanne and Sheila, you had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Okay. What were you going to say?
Yeah, in the eyes of the Lord, Rabbi, I thought all men were equal. When my husband died,
No,
what?
nothing.
When my husband died, a long time ago now, a certain rabbi there really didn't want to know us or anything. But when he found out all the good and everything that my husband did, was a different kettle of fish. He was all over everybody, friendly and everything. Well, is that right?
I can't speak for other people, so I think
Pass.
as a Jew, you try and love every Jew. That's what you've got to do. We're brothers, we're sisters, we're one big family.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it's not a question one does good or one doesn't. Everybody's equal. Yeah.
Regardless of the good they do, everyone is created in the image of God and has godliness within them. And so we're tasked to treat everybody equally as we would ourselves. It doesn't say treat good people as you would treat yourselves. It's treat all people.
Yeah, and ultimately we're not God's accountants. So we can't. There's no judgment except we're not judges. We just do the best we can, and we don't try and look at other people and say they're right or wrong. That's not our job. You know, that's his job. He can sort that out. That's God's job. And I think that the thing that I would try to do is that if there's someone who I find might be initially tricky, I might have some sort of inner pull to judge them or find them difficult. So then it's actually to seek out the goodness, to look for the things about them that I can respect and admire and see that goodness. Because if one looks for it, one's always going to find something amazing about another person. Everyone has something which can be admired, which can be respected, which can really be held up. And you just try and think about that every time you talk to them or every time you're with them, and it transforms the way you relate to each other.
Likewise, if you see something not good in someone, often if you do some soul searching, sometimes it's a reflection of ourselves.
Yeah, those mirrors. Okay.
Can you hear me now, Rabbi and Rebbetzen?
Some we can hear you.
Oh, good evening. Good evening, all. Well, just want to ask a question. 2 weeks ago, we had 2 parashot of Matot Masai. Why do we read the Haftarah from the second parashah of Masai? And on Shachrit during the week, Monday, Thursday, we only read the first portion of the parashah.
That's a great question.
Over to you.
Over to you.
I'll pass that on.
I don't know that. I think, you know, there is convention around some of these things. So when we join them together, we start from the beginning. It's a conceptual unit that we read on Mondays and Thursdays. But I'm not sure the convention as to why we read the that particular haftarah, though we do begin at that point the haftarot to do, I think, with the destruction of the temple.
The five haftarot, I believe, before Tisha B'Av. So they're very much of a theme.
Yeah, maybe we've got Barry on Zoom this evening.
Nice. Thank you.
Maybe Barry can help out.
Yes.
He wants to unmute himself.
Remaining anonymous, I think.
Remaining anonymous. Okay, so I have to come back to that one. So that's a good question.
Yeah, okay. No problem.
So, do you have a question? No?
I have a question when you're ready.
Go on, Glenn, you're on.
I'm very interested in the history of head covering. I would like to know when it started. Is it just merely chukas hagoy, or is there more into it than that? And also, I do believe that historically, the only time you wore head covering was during tefillah prayers and also when you're eating. Would you like to tell me something about the history of it?
You're talking male head covering?
Yeah.
Yeah, male for the moment. So I'm happy to talk about female as well, because I have my own theory on that. So I don't want to cause any embarrassment. So let's start on the male first, if you have no objections, and then let's go on to the female side.
You want to take male or female?
No, I'll stick to female.
Are you sure?
I'll stick to female.
Okay, that's a good question, Glenn. I think it's true that it's not been throughout Jewish history that we have that Jews have covered their head. What has been throughout Jewish history is that people who are of a higher station, so the sages, the judges, the kings, etc., they would cover their head as a mark of respect, a mark of dignity. I suppose much in the way, like a little bit differently, but you know, it used to be in society that anyone who was anyone would walk out that you would never walk out the house with your head uncovered. You'd walk out your house with a hat. And you would take it off possibly when you're back indoors, but you never walk out with a hat. That's not the way a respectable gentleman walks about on the street. You walk out with a hat. So you know, that's a long-standing practice. And as time progressed, so that practice became more embedded and ingrained, not just as an indication of status, but also as a mark of Jewishness. And so it transmuted itself from simply sort of a custom or a social practice into something that then took on a defining mark of what it meant to be Jewish. And once it has that mark, so then it starts to get halakhic definition as well. So that's why wearing a kappa, wearing a yarmulke, wearing a kippah, whatever skull cap, whatever label we want to give to it, of any color, fashion or variety, black, white, knitted, velvet, leather, whatever, that's become a mark of what it is to be a Jew, to be a Jew. And yes, there are contemporary or relatively contemporary halakhic authorities that talk about particular times that it's of greater importance to wear it, such as during prayer or making a blessing and eating. And that if there was possibly going to be difficulty in the workplace, there might be grounds to think about it and discuss it. But by and large, it's become such an ingrained mark that it has taken on that status of halacha. I have to tell you one thing. One of my sermons for Rosh Hashanah in Kingston was talking about what it means to celebrate being a Jew, and we talked about and reflected on standing up for our Jewish identity and being proud of our Jewish identity. And Jewish identity comes in many forms, but one marker for a man of Jewish identity is to wear a head covering to demonstrate that that I'm a Jew. So I gave everyone a challenge. I said, you could walk around Kingston and you would have thought that there's only one Jewish man that lives here, because there's only one Jewish man in Kingston that walks around publicly with a kippah, and that's the rabbi of the community. So I said, look, there are hundreds of us here. This Rosh Hashanah, when you walk out of shul, after the 10 steps that you normally take and then take it off, just leave it on. Just leave it on. And feel proud to walk down the street, hundreds of Jews on their holiest day. So it was a beautiful thing. Hundreds of Jews walking down the street. I said to the ladies, put out your Magen Davids, hold your machzorim. It's a little bit different, but and so I think that even if it doesn't have the strongest of halachic underpinnings, because of what it means, what it represents, it's become much more significant. But over now to Shoshana to tell us about the very strong halachic underpinnings for a lady.
Right. But also a little bit nebulous, because the first time that we see a reference to a woman's head covering is when we learn about the sota, the woman who's accused of adulterous relations, and it says that she goes before the high priest and he uncovers her braids. So we infer from that the norm was for a woman, a married woman at least, to have her, or at least a portion of her hair covered. But again, that's not an absolute proof that all women, married women at all times, covered all of their hair. And there's a lot of discussion in the Gemara around that topic. But here's where we can really split this whole sort of corpus of I'm sorry, this is where we can really split the whole, this whole gamut of laws. I see that, Susie, of laws around what we might call modesty. That there are those that are rooted in a very halachic, a very Torah halachic basis, but then there are also societal or more subjective laws around modesty as well. And when it comes to hair covering, the fact that, like with men wearing a kippah, the fact that it's become a calling card of Jewish women also makes that somewhat binding. Well, how and where and how much of a woman's hair she chooses to cover is, again, that's up for a lot of discussion. Whether that's the majority of her hair, whether that's a tokenistic head covering, is all sort of different communities have their different customs. And so long as one is following the custom of their community, then that's considered absolutely fine. So again, a little bit nebulous in the manner of hair covering, but we can trace it.
Trace the requirement.
The requirement to a Torah source, which is when we learn about the sota.
Russell, you've had your hand up, or virtual hand up, for a long time.
Thank you. So you mentioned Rosh Hashanah, which obviously we're starting to think about. First day Rosh Hashanah falls on a Shabbos, and I believe that we don't blow the shofar simply because there's a risk that the shofar will then be carried out. Is that still appropriate if we've got an Eruv?
Oh, great question.
Yes.
I mean, you could even stand back and say, even if there wasn't an eruv, the shofar is a biblical requirement to blow the shofar, and there's a rabbinic concern here of carrying. But how can a rabbinic concern of not carrying uproot the biblical requirement of blowing the shofar, right? So you know, it's the rabbis are there to support the Torah, not to undermine the Torah. So how can it be that they can cancel a mitzvah essentially for that year? Because we're going to be blowing the shofar on Sunday, which is the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which is a rabbinic sort of expression of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is still really only one day. Even in the land of Israel, they still have a question about which day it falls, and therefore even in the land of Israel they keep 2 days and we keep 2 days, but the biblical mitzvah is on the first day. So the answer is that since the rabbis are coming to protect the Torah, the way that they can do this is to say they can't uproot it actively, but they can uproot something passively. They can say sit, shev va'al ta'aseh, stop, sit, literally, and don't do. And that shev va'al ta'aseh is a manner of stepping back and saying there is danger in following through with this requirement right now. This could lead to carrying, and that's a biblical violation of Shabbat, but it wouldn't be a violation on so it's a biblical violation of Shabbat, and so therefore we have to not do shofar. Okay, so what about if there's an eruv? So that's a great question. So I think that I don't have a great answer actually, but I think that an answer generally is that law has to be clear, cut. And if we start sort of chopping and changing, making exceptions, in this community they do blow shofar because they have an eruv. In that community they don't blow shofar because they don't have an eruv. It starts creating quite a confusing thing. Are we blowing shofar? We're not blowing shofar. It's almost like there's going to be a multiplicity, a plurality of practice on this day, and that doesn't feel like it gives the right impression either. So normally when something like this would happen, rather than creating this significant plurality of practice across different communities, we stick with the one rule, and that becomes a blanket rule, even though you could start looking for exceptions.
Is there also an idea of the shofar being muktzah for anyone, lest they pick it up and just start practicing with it?
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Because you can't do it.
Right. Oh, I see.
Yeah, so Ronnie.
Yeah. When I was about 12 and a half, that was about a few years ago, my father used to drag me to shul of an evening, and I'm in drag, for Mincha and Marav, and if there was never a minyan, he gave me a chumash, which I had to hold. Why was that? How does that allow me to make up the 13th and the 10th person?
So it's an interesting one. It's an interesting halacha. It's like we boost your age a little bit by the power of the Torah behind you, the power of the Chumash with you. It's a very it's an imperfect get out for trying to make up for minyan. That as a child who is an expression of the Torah, a shining soul, together with the Torah, maybe we can give enough sanctity through that to have that resting of the divine presence.
But at the same time, in a Sephardi shul or in some other shuls, being 12 and a half would not preclude you from.
I always wondered why. I forget. Now I know. Thank you.
So therefore, if Ronnie was 12 and a half and he held a chumash and he made up a minyan, were the people there able to say Kaddish?
Yeah, they will.
I think the bigger question really is that if Ronnie, if you were of the maturity that you could understand what you were saying and what you were doing, then many communities would hold that you're fit to take part in a minyan anyway. So age.
Oh, biologically fit.
Right, to take part in a minyan anyway. Sylvie, who's watching on YouTube.
Oh yeah, it's everyone. Go on.
It's everyone. Lost your mum. I think the question is that this person doesn't feel able to go to her mother's grave and feels guilty about it. I don't think, Judaism gives us a way to grieve and a way to mourn. And it's interesting that we're not actually told to visit. We're not told to visit a gravesite. It's become custom for many people to visit at key times of the year. But again, that's a custom, that's not a halacha. And while there are halachot that teach us to mourn for a parent or for a loved one and teach us how to behave during bereavement, that isn't one of them. And and Susie's answered brilliantly. Susie, why don't you join us on this side of the computer? Never feel guilty. Everyone does deal with grief differently. And Susie, I'm not even going to bother paraphrasing. It's what's in your heart that matters, and it's between you and her and Hashem, and that's absolutely spot on. There is no guilt to be felt, Sylvie. There's what's between, like Susie said, what Susie Shaw said, it's what's in your heart that matters. There's nothing wrong with not being able to visit a grave. And again, I keep bringing in my Sephardi roots, but in fact, Sephardi women don't go to a gravesite at all. I have never been more or less never until I joined the United Synagogue, never been to a gravesite, and nor has anyone in my family.
Yeah, and I just add to that your mum and anyone who's passed away is not in one specific location, because they're in the world of the soul now, the world of the spirit. And so you can talk to her wherever you are, because she is always with you and always looking down on you and caring for you and shining her love towards you. So that grave is the place that her body is resting, but her soul and all of that she was is right there with you right now. Senior Warden would like to ask a question. You're muted, Barry. Barry, you're muted. 1 second.
Oh,
now you're unmuted.
Okay. Can I come? Hello. Can I come in on two previous points? Firstly, Ronnie's point about a boy making up a minion. We have done that in Barnet, and the rule. This was midweek services in Barnet, at a point where we had 9 adults, one of them wanting to say Kaddish, and a boy under the age of 13 who was deemed to understand what was going on and what his responsibility was with Kaddish being recited. The other thing I wanted to say, I don't know if it was clarified completely, Sasson's point about the Haftorahs. I know Rabbi Landau mentioned my name, but I was watching on YouTube and couldn't reply at that point. So from the fast of Tammuz, there are 10 special Haftorahs which we recite. The first 3 are the Haftorahs of affliction, and the last 7 are the Haftorahs of consolation. And those are all compulsory. So because the fast of Tammuz was before Shabbat Pinchas, then on Shabbat Pinchas, we read the Haftorah of Matot, because that's an obligatory Haftorah. And therefore the second week, we read the Haftorah of Masih. And this Shabbat, which is Shabbat Nachamu, is the first of the 7 Haftorahs of consolation. And there are other complications down the line. For instance, when Rosh Chodesh comes along, and when we get to Shabbat Ki Tetzei, there are occasions when we double up on the Haftorah, and it becomes the Haftorah of Noach. That's all a bit confusing. But that is to make sure that we don't miss any of those 10 special Haftorahs.
Senior Warden, where would we be without your guidance? The shul is like a ship without a captain.
Senior Warden.
He is a mine of information, Barry.
Just years of experience. And there are a number of tricks with haftorahs as well, but if you don't know what's going on, you can be caught out.
Any questions? Any more questions? Son, you had your hand up again.
And Glenn also is, I think.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, or is somebody else speaking? I apologise if that's the case.
It's okay. So
Can you hear me?
You're on, Glenn.
May I ask another question?
Yes.
Interrupting somebody else. I'm intrigued by the answer to your question, and if you don't want to answer it, I understand. If we had another temple, and I don't so that's the question. If we had a temple, would you like to have sacrificial services again? Because it's a very important question, and nobody gives a truthful answer.
Why?
I don't see why not.
Well, my question is, would you like to see animals sacrificed or slaughtered in the temple? Because the temple really was an abattoir.
Yes, it was. We're told that it was running with rivers of blood.
Yes, and the incense, and the incense is to cover up the smells.
Yeah, well,
it's just like the French with all their sauces, is to cover up bad food.
Was that the case, really?
That was the origin, yes.
I love
That was the origin. So the question is, would you like to see sacrifices returned if we had a temple?
So it's a good question, and it's worth noting that you're speaking to I call myself a flexitarian, an almost entirely vegetarian here, or pescatarian.
You're a pescatarian?
By and large, yes. When we can get organic chickens, organic free-range chickens, which they sometimes stock, then we do get them.
Yeah, you can. There was a problem with that because you can get them, but they cannot call them. You get free range. They cannot call them
organic.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the ones that we get, regardless of the quandary. The question is, would I like to see them return? Of course, I would. They are part of the temple service, so yes, I would like them to return. Would I like to see the animals being slaughtered? No, probably not. And I think nobody really likes to see, or not many people like to see, and that may be one of the reasons why the Kohanim were on a strict rotation. No one can slaughter animals all day, every day, for all of their life.
The shochet do.
No, a shochet doesn't slaughter all day, every day. A shochet also has periods of slaughter and periods of not. Now, I think it's as simple as this. I do not like seeing animals suffering, but I don't have a problem with animals being killed and raised and then killed humanely for our consumption, because we have been permitted to consume meat. In the same way that I would kill, or I'm okay with a humane killing of animals to sustain my body, if I see temple services as nourishing my spirit and the spirituality of all of the Jewish people, then I can't have a problem with animals being slaughtered. And anyone who is happy to eat meat, I don't think really has much of an argument if they really care about their spirituality, their spiritual nourishment. In that case, I don't know if that really answers the question.
No, because if you ask the congregation, if you were in shul and asked the congregation, would you like to see animal sacrifices, they'd all say no.
So I think
no doubt about it.
So Glenn, I think it's a great question. I think one of the issues.
It's a very serious question.
So I don't think
because let's look at it historically. The animal sacrifices replaced human sacrifices.
So let's talk.
Original. So then we now go on to nowadays we would give tzedakah, charity.
No, we don't. We have prayer instead.
And that's what would happen. But if you're going to tell me in your heart of hearts, and you're entitled to your opinion, of course, that you would like to see animals slaughtered for sacrificial purposes, I can't go on with that. And I don't think anybody else would.
Glenn, do you want an answer? Glenn, let's answer.
Ask the people here. Be interesting. Ask the people who are on this Zoom meeting what they think, because it's a very interesting point.
Very interesting
You
point.
don't have to agree, but you've been very quiet.
Can't.
Everybody's on the question. You have told me.
I thought the whole point of the services, the musaf and the shepherd's musaf, was to replace the sacrifices.
Yeah, that is quite.
So how can you justify if we okay, yes, the temple might be rebuilt in our days, please God, but you know what? Why should we just not carry on with these services rather than? I mean, I'm with Glenn on this one. I mean, how does slaughtering an animal improve our spiritual well-being? After all, I mean, for what purpose? How does slaughtering the animal make it a soul elevating thing?
Okay, so these are good questions. Rena has a point.
But
yes, I mean, I take issue with what Shoshana was saying about slaughtering an animal for slaughtering an animal for our consumption, because that is done in a private space, basically. My concern about animal sacrifices or any other in a temple is where historically, I mean, we know this, that this, I'm not sure about in our times, but certainly a mass of people witnessing slaughter tends to elevate their frenzy, if you like, and can lead to orgies and well, bad behavior generally. Something about our basic, I mean, I'm not talking about myself because I couldn't bear to watch an animal being slaughtered myself, but there are people who get a certain satisfaction, a kind of visceral satisfaction of seeing slaughter. And it appeals to their baser sense, not to their higher sense. That's what worries me about the idea. Well, one of the things that worries me about it. It's to me, it's not healthy for the human soul for a large crowd of people watching some animal getting slaughtered. I think it's just. I don't think it's a very spiritual thing. I think it just appeals to one's basic instincts rather than good ones. That's my opinion anyway. And it certainly has happened in the past, in Roman times, in Greek times, or in other, in primitive, even now, you know, in primitive societies even now, where the idea of sacrificing an animal and a slaughter it doesn't bode for good, put it that way.
Okay, thank you everyone for comments and some really thoughtful points. Let's begin. Let's say there seems like there's two different questions here. One is about taking the life of animals, and the other one is about sacrificing the temple. So let's begin with taking the life of animals, and something that Shoshana and I discuss a lot of the time is, you know, Shoshana made this point that she's a pescatarian most by and large, but we would have, say, an organic free-range chicken that has then had shrita. So how does one balance those two things? By the way, if you thought kosher chickens were expensive, organic kosher chickens are really kicking.
He doesn't like it when I buy them.
It's 20 pounds a bird.
You can't prove it.
So why is it that Shoshana would be happy? Or so the reason is that because Shoshana's not against taking the life of an animal. What she's against is the way that normally industrial farming and industrial agriculture happens, such that chickens are kept in tiny little spaces. They're not, 30% of them can't even bear their own weight, and when they stand up, their legs break. They're force-fed hormones and antibiotics in order to bring them to full size within 6 weeks.
And I think this actually ties into what Rena said, which is that you wouldn't be able to bring yourself to slaughter an animal, and that's all done in private. I actually think that's part of the problem, because if it were done in public, then there's no way that animals could be kept in the conditions that they are kept in today. Go back a couple of thousand years and animals were kept very differently and slaughtered very differently.
Not only 1,000, a couple of hundred.
A couple of hundred years, animals were kept and slaughtered very differently, and it's because it's been such a sterilized and privatized process. And
so for example, shrita, there's a whole debate raging about shrita. Is it the most humane way of, is it the most painless, least painless? The thing about shrita is whether it is the most painless or it isn't the most painless, it is the most humane. Why?
It's the most humbling.
Because what do you have to do? You have to pick up this animal, you have to make a bracha and say thank you for this life. You have to look that animal in the eye and take its life. So it doesn't, there's no disconnection, there's no stun gun, there's no machine, there's no gassing, there's no chamber that you're in and the animal, you're right there with the animal, you hold it whilst it dies. And so the reason that shrita is the most human way of killing an animal is because it maintains one's humanity, because you have to be there with the animal and say thank you, look it in the eye and say thank you for the nourishment that your life is going to give my life. And so that's what shrita is about. And so fine. That's, I think,
it's about connecting to an animal in a way that we don't connect to our supermarket chickens.
Correct. The next question is how to understand that process then occurring in the holiest place on earth in the original expression of prayer. Because as Susie correctly said, once the temple was destroyed, we didn't have service in terms of a temple service, we had service in terms of service of the heart, worship of the heart, giving of our feelings, giving of our emotions, sacrificing not animals, but sacrificing our emotions and our being to offer it up to God and say, let me connect to you, let me have a relationship with you. So then the question is, how is a sacrifice, how is taking a life a vehicle for building a relationship with God? That's a great question. And I don't think we can really understand it without having a greater sensitivity to life, to taking life, and also having seen what it was like there. I think that nothing I can say next will offer sufficient kind of insight to then make this palatable, because we live in the 21st century. This is so far away from our experience that the way that we connect is through prayer. We do not connect through animal sacrifice. So, you know, when Glenn asks, would you want it? You know, would I want it? Well, I don't, that's not how I connect. So kind of, if you were to ask me right now, I wouldn't want it. But so what do we do with that? Well, we have to try and understand why we're not appreciating it. What is it that was happening then that was powerful and that we don't really fully grasp right now? So just to paint a few ideas, if you have a deep relationship with an individual, if you have a committed relationship to someone, so then the greatest, I think, expression of how you can be committed to them, devoted to them, is to say, I would do anything for you. I would give anything for you. Like, I would give anything for you. I would give anything, right? So that expression is like, you know, I'd give my life for you. You know, you think that when you hold your children, or you hold your spouse, or you're with your parents, you know, your loved ones, you think, I'd do anything for you. I'd die for you. I really would, like, because you're my priority. So
put your money where your mouth.
Put my money where your mouth is. So there's no opportunity right now, thank God. But the question here is, so if I want to have a deep relationship with God and I want to express, I do anything for you. I give anything. I give my life for you. So then how can I manifest that sort of intensity of emotion every so often, not necessarily sort of every day, because sacrifices weren't a daily occurrence for an individual. They were at specific times, specific outpourings of either remorse or outpourings of thanks, specific times that I would want to demonstrate some act of devotion. Like
coming through a life-threatening.
Yeah, like in a relationship, we just celebrated our anniversary recently. So that's an opportunity for giving something, for demonstrating something in a physical form, like a present, to say thank you for everything. So you come to the temple, and how do I metaphorically or symbolically say I give my life to you? Well, I can't kill myself because that would be silly. But what I can do is, using the life of another animal, thankfully taken with a blessing, express express, pardon?
And then
feed the priest. Yeah, express. I would give, if I could, I'd give my life for you. Now I can't give my life for you because you want me to live, but this animal you've offered to me to connect to as a means to demonstrate that emotion, that experience of I would do anything for you. And so I take the life of the animal instead. Which feeds my family, feeds the priest if it's that sort of offering.
Right. So punitive executions, I think, Susie, generally wouldn't be the correct term, because those executions are the same kinds of chickens that you
can't hear you, Shoshana.
Sorry, the punitive executions, I think, would be few and far between, because majority of these animals would be going to feed in the same way that the chickens that you buy at kosher deli or shefa or la boucherie would go to feed your family. One would take their korban or part of their korban home and feed their family, and part of it would go to the priests and nourish the priests who worked in the temple. And so that was a way of giving to God. So I'm not sure that punitive executions would be the right term there, but I see the point.
Can I ask a further question, please?
Sure, Sasson.
Yeah, just to the point of Russell raised about the blowing of the shofar on Saturday, Sunday. I don't know, what's the actual liberal and reform? Are they having 2 days Rosh Hashanah? And if they do, what they do for Sunday, are they not blowing the shofar?
I don't know. I don't know if what our colleagues in the other denominations do. But,
I can answer that.
Okay, you've been one. Okay.
No, the Reform certainly do have 2 days Rosh Hashanah. They don't have 2 days of any other Yom Tov, but they do have 2 days Rosh Hashanah. And I presume they blow the shofar on both days.
Okay, that's the question. Okay, thank you. Very good.
Okay, so we are winding down our hour together. Maybe we can take one last question, if there is one. Okay, well, we'll have to leave it in bated breath until next time. This is turning out to be a wonderful way of coming together. So look for this coming up. Look for any questions coming up next month. Also, look out in your inboxes for immediately booking for Tisha B'Av, so that because we have Tisha B'Av services coming up on Wednesday night and on Thursday. But also, we are now going to be surveying the community regarding your preferences for coming together over the High Holy Days. We are going to be running as many services as there is demand, so that everyone that wants to come to shul will be able to come to shul. Anyone that wants to log in prior to Yom Tov coming in will be able to do so as well. But in terms of offering whatever we can in shul, we're going to be having multiple services throughout the day, and we want to know what you would like to come to. So please, if you would like to come to shul, do fill out that form, that survey. That helps us, that enables us to get the data that we need in order to put on the services for everybody in the community. So look out for that. That'll be coming out in the next couple of days. I wish you all well over the fast. I just want to say a massive thank you to Shoshana, my part of this half of this act.
I know,
this couple.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for logging on this evening. Everyone should be well, and I wish you well over the fast.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you for a good ceremony.
Now they can hear you. Thank you.
I enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We'll have the fast.
Thank you. Bye.